Episode 1, The First Song at Midnight. They told me the chapel was dead long before I was born. Its roof sagged beneath the weight of decades, its stained glass windows cracked and blind, its wooden door swollen with rot. No one went there anymore, at least, not since the fire. And yet, on the night I first walked past it, the place was anything but silent. It began as a hum, low, steady, like the vibration of a distant organ drifting on the wind. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. Who expects music in the middle of the forest at midnight? But then the hum grew richer, layered, until voices blossomed out of the dark. Not one voice, a choir. The sound poured from the chapel's belly, rising through its crooked steeple. Men, women, children, many voices, weaving into a hymn. But there were no words I could recognize. It wasn't Latin, though I'd grown up hearing it in Mass. It wasn't any human tongue I knew. Each note slid into the next like oil on water, heavy and smooth, filled with a strange sweetness that clung to my chest. I froze on the path, my breath catching. There was no lantern light inside. The chapel had no congregation. No priest had served there in half a century, and yet the hymn swelled, filling the forest as though invisible lungs had opened wide to sing. Against all reason, I stepped closer. The wooden door loomed, chained and bolted, but I could feel vibrations thrumming through the frame. My hand brushed the handle. It was warm, as though someone inside had been gripping it moments before. That's when I noticed something worse. The grass at my feet was bent, pressed down in neat rows as if dozens had walked into the chapel not long ago. But the door hadn't opened in years. I told myself to leave, to run, but the hymn wouldn't let me. It rose higher, richer, until my bones ached with it. My heartbeat matched its rhythm, my breath staggered to its pace, my knees buckled. Not from fear, but from something closer to reverence. For a moment I felt as if the song wasn't just being sung to God, it was being sung to me. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. The silence afterward was worse than the singing. It pressed in, suffocating, heavy as a coffin lid. I realized, with horror, that I had been leaning against the chapel door, ear pressed to the wood. The warmth beneath my skin faded instantly, like a hand pulling away. Somewhere in the blackness inside, something whispered, a single note drawn out and lonely. Not a choir this time, just one voice. And it was humming my name. Episode 2, The Hymn Without Words. I didn't sleep that night. Even after I left the forest, even after I shut my door and locked it twice, the sound lingered in my ears. It wasn't the full choir anymore, only fragments of it, like echoes trapped in the hollows of my skull. Every time I closed my eyes, the last thing I had heard returned, that lone voice humming my name. At dawn, I told myself it had been a trick. Exhaustion, nerves, maybe the wind bending through the trees in a strange way. But as daylight spilled across the village, I noticed something unsettling. The birds near the forest were silent. The air hung heavy, like the pause before a storm. No one else seemed to notice, or maybe no one dared to. By evening, curiosity strangled fear. I went back. The chapel looked worse in the light. Charred beams still clawed the sky where the fire had eaten the roof. The windows were scabbed with soot. The bell tower leaned, crooked like a broken neck. Yet the moment I stepped onto the chapel grounds, the world hushed again. No wind, no rustling branches, only silence waiting to be broken. And then it was. The hymn returned, not from an organ, not from any human throat. It rose from nowhere and everywhere at once, weaving itself into the air like smoke. But this time, I listened more carefully. There were no words, not in any language. Each voice climbed and fell in strange intervals, as though following a pattern older than memory, older than scripture. I knelt instinctively, not out of devotion, but because my body couldn't stand under the weight of that sound. It wasn't beautiful, not exactly. It was too heavy for beauty, too sharp for peace. It was a song that demanded attention, that forced your soul to bend whether you wished to or not. Through the broken glass of the chapel window, I thought I saw shadows moving. Not people, shapes, long, thin, stretched, as though they were cast by invisible bodies. They swayed with the music, flickering in rhythm, though the floor inside was empty. A sudden chill gnawed at my spine. I forced myself closer, pressing my face to the window's jagged frame. The interior was ruined, pews collapsed. The altar cracked in two, dust thick as ash. And yet the air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from stone. That shimmer bent and twisted into figures, phantoms of a choir that sang without lips or lungs. Then one of them turned. It had no face, no form, only the impression of a presence. But I knew, God help me, I knew, it was looking at me. The hymn faltered for a single beat, and in that silence a sound slithered out beneath the music. It was laughter, soft, childlike, but stretched too thin, like a rope about to snap. I stumbled back, scraping my palms against the stone wall. My breath came ragged, desperate. The hymn swelled again, drowning out the laugh, but I could still feel it hiding inside the melody, coiled like a snake. That was the moment I understood. The chapel did not sing to praise God. It sang to be heard. And now it knew I was listening. Episode 3, Echoes in the Pew. I told myself I wouldn't go back. After what I'd seen, shadows with no bodies, hymns with no words, laughter folded inside the melody, I swore I would keep my distance. Yet by the third night, I found myself standing once more at the chapel gates, as if my feet belonged to someone else. The place had grown darker since my last visit, not just from the moonless sky, but from something heavier that clung to the chapel itself. Its charred stones seemed to absorb what little light remained. Its windows gleamed like blind eyes, and when I pushed the door, I realized something was wrong. It opened. The lock, the bolts, the rusted chains that had sealed it tight, they were gone. Not broken, not forced, simply gone. The door swung with a groan that bled into silence. And silence, I knew by now, never lasted long here. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of wax and ash. Dust floated in the dim moonlight, seeping through the shattered roof. I stepped over collapsed beams, my boots crunching against glass shards, and something else. Dried wax, melted and hardened into strange patterns along the floor. Trails of it wound between the pews like veins. And then I noticed the pews themselves. They had been moved, not randomly. No, they stood in jagged rows, angled inward toward the altar, but uneven, as though dragged by unseen hands. Their wood was splintered, carved with lines deep enough to bleed. At first I thought they were scratches. Then I realized they were words. Latin. Some phrases I recognized from childhood prayers, others broken, twisted, but none of them finished. Each line stopped mid-sentence, as if cut short. The hymn began again. This time I was inside when it rose. The sound swelled through the rafters, shaking dust from the beams. The pews groaned in answer, vibrating like strings of an unseen instrument. My chest locked tight. I could feel the song pressing against me, not into my ears but into my bones. I gripped one of the carved pews to steady myself. My fingers traced a half-written phrase, Ave Maria. Gert. The line ended abruptly. The wood beneath my hand was warm, pulsing faintly like flesh. Something shifted at the altar. The cracked slab of stone stood crooked, split by fire and time. Yet a thin glow seeped from the break, flickering with each note of the hymn. Wax trails converged there, hardened drips forming the outline of kneeling figures. Dozens of them. Their faces were smeared into nothing, their heads bent toward the altar in eternal prayer. But the chapel only sang when no one prayed. The realization crashed through me like cold water. These weren't figures of devotion. They were warnings. Every unfinished prayer carved into the pews, every faceless figure at the altar, they weren't praising God. They were the ones who failed. The hymn reached its climax, shattering the silence, rattling the walls, and in its swell, I heard something new. Not a word, not a name, a plea. It was begging me to sing back. Episode 4, The Unseen Choir. The moment I stepped outside the chapel that night, the hymn clung to me like smoke. It didn't fade with distance. It followed. Each note threaded itself into the air around me, until I couldn't tell whether I was still hearing it, or whether it had sunk inside my chest. I thought avoiding the chapel would save me, so I stayed away. I barred my windows, whispered desperate prayers over my bed. Yet the hymn returned, each night sharper, closer, as if the singers had learned where I lived. On the fourth night, I woke to the sound of voices in my own room. I lit a candle with shaking hands. The flame trembled, but no one was there. Only shadows stretching across the wall, shadows that moved in time with the melody. I realized then, the choir no longer belonged to the chapel alone. It had followed me home. By morning, my body ached as though I'd been forced to kneel all night. My throat burned raw, though I hadn't spoken. And when I opened my mouth to drink water, a single note slipped out. It wasn't mine, it was theirs. That was when I understood. They wanted me to join them. I returned to the chapel at dusk, against every instinct. The forest seemed thinner now, its trees bending away from the ruin as though recoiling. The chapel door yawned open, waiting. Inside, dust swirled in columns of moonlight and the pews shifted slightly, groaning as if they'd been dragged while I was gone. The hymn rose again, louder than ever, and then, for the first time, I saw them. Not with eyes, at least not in the way we see flesh and bone. They revealed themselves through the shimmer of air, a distortion bending light. Dozens of figures lined the ruined pews, shapes without edges, swaying in rhythm. Their mouths were voids, black slits opening wider and wider, but no sound came from them. Yet the song was deafening. They were the choir, unseen and impossible, and their hymn filled the chapel like a flood. Their presence weighed on me until my knees buckled, and I collapsed against the cold stone. One of them moved closer. Its face was nothing but blur, but I could feel its attention, like heat pressing into my skin. Its mouth widened, stretching until it split the air. The note that poured from it was a vibration that rattled my teeth. My own lips trembled in answer, fighting to shape the same sound. "No!" I gasped, clamping my hands over my mouth. The figure bent lower. The rest of the choir leaned with it, all those faceless voids swaying in unison. Their hymn twisted, shifting into a single, hollow command. "Sing!" I fled before my voice could betray me. But even as I ran through the forest, the echoes followed, and with every breath, I heard my throat hum a note I hadn't chosen. Episode 5, The Priest Who Never Left. The morning after my fourth visit, I was too weak to rise. My body shook with fever, though no illness gripped me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, the choir, swaying in faceless unison, mouths stretched wide, commanding me to sing. I thought I would go mad if I stayed silent, but I feared worse if I obeyed. By midday, I forced myself into the village, desperate for answers. I hadn't spoken to anyone about the chapel, afraid they'd think me mad. But as I passed the well, an old man sitting on the stone rim caught my eye. His skin was weathered like bark, his back bent, yet his eyes were sharp as knives. "You've heard it, haven't you?" he asked. I froze. He didn't wait for me to reply. "The singing." His voice cracked around the word, as though it tasted like ash. "You went near the chapel. How do you—" I began, but he cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Everyone knows better than to go there. Everyone but fools, and the damned." His gaze pinned me like a nail. "Which are you?" I swallowed. "What is it? Who sings?" The old man's hands clenched the stone well as though he might crush it. His voice dropped to a rasp. "Not who. What remains?" I leaned closer. He glanced around before whispering, "The priest never left." The words chilled me more than any hymn. He told me of Father Mateo, the last man to serve the chapel before the fire. A devout priest obsessed with purity, with driving sin out of the village. But obsession is a dangerous prayer. He began locking himself inside, holding mass with no one present, chanting litanies until his voice broke. They said he tried to summon angels to guard the chapel after the fire threatened it, but no angels came. One night, his voice didn't stop, the old man said. The villagers heard it, chants spilling through the walls, louder, higher, until it wasn't human anymore. They found the chapel burning. But inside, he shook his head. No body, just his robe, folded on the altar. And the singing never ceased. My stomach twisted. "You mean the choir you hear is him, or what he became?" His voice split into many. "It calls to anyone who listens. Once it knows your name." He trailed off, eyes dark with pity. "It won't let you go." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. His words had the weight of truth because I'd already felt it. The hymn threading into me, shaping my breath, bending my will. The old man clutched my arm with surprising strength. "Leave this village, tonight. If you stay, you'll sing with them. And when you do, you'll never stop." His grip trembled, his eyes glassy with dread. "Remember this?" he whispered. The chapel only sings when no one prays. If you dare kneel inside, if you dare whisper a prayer. His lips quivered. It will fall silent, and silence is worse. Episode 6, The Forgotten Psalm. The old man's warning gnawed at me long after he left me trembling by the well. The chapel only sings when no one prays. His words circled my thoughts like vultures tearing at my resolve. That night, the hymn returned stronger than before. I tried covering my ears, humming to drown it out, but the melody seeped through skin and bone. It twisted into my dreams until I woke with a start to find my lips moving, whispering a rhythm I did not choose. Enough. If silence was worse, I needed to know why. I returned to the chapel at dusk, candle in hand, heart rattling in my chest. The air inside was colder than night should allow, damp with the rot of burned timber and the sweetness of wax. My steps echoed too loud, as if the chapel wanted me to know I was intruding. I approached the altar. The stone slab was cracked, its edges blackened by fire. Beneath the rubble, something gleamed faintly. I pulled away a charred beam and unearthed a brittle book, its cover scorched, its pages half fused by ash. Yet one leaf in the center remained untouched, as if spared deliberately. I raised the candle. The page was written in Latin, but not like the prayers I remembered from childhood. The words shifted in the flickering light, blurring at the edges as if unwilling to be read. My lips formed them aloud without consent, syllables thick on my tongue. The hymn answered. The choir erupted all at once, their faceless swell pressing against the walls, rattling glass from broken frames. Shadows swayed across the pews, bowing in rhythm, though the air stank of sulfur instead of incense. My knees hit the ground as the page burned in my hands, ink bleeding like fresh blood. The words seared into my mind. Psalmus obscurus. A psalm that did not exist in Scripture. A song not meant for God, but for something else entirely. And then I realized something that curdled my blood. The melody etched on the page. It matched the hymn I'd been hearing. Every note, every rise and fall. Only now, with the words restored, I understood fragments of it. Not praise, not prayer, a plea, a binding. It wasn't a choir worshiping. It was a choir holding something back. The air shimmered before me, the figures bending closer, their void mouths gaping wide. The hymn thundered until the stone walls quivered, and in the roar of it all I heard one voice split from the rest, deep, ragged, furious. It bellowed from beneath the altar, shaking the chapel to its core. The choir screamed louder, as though to drown it out. My ears rang, my body convulsed with the force of the sound. And in the chaos, the page in my hands crumbled to ash. Silence fell. The figures froze. The glow beneath the altar dimmed. And then, one by one, the faceless shadows turned toward me. The hymn had stopped, because now they were waiting for me to sing it. Episode 7. The Bells That Rang Without Hands. The first time I heard the bell, I thought I was dreaming. A single chime, low and heavy, rolled through the night like thunder, then another, then another. By the third strike, my eyes flew open. The sound wasn't in my head, it was real. The chapel's bell, long rusted, long broken, was tolling in the dead of night. I looked to the clock on my wall. The hands pointed to 3:33. Each strike rattled through my bones, deeper than any sound should travel. I stumbled to the window and peered toward the forest. The trees seemed to shiver as the bell carried through them, pulling the world awake. Dogs barked in distant farms. Crows took flight in black clouds. But the village was silent, as though everyone had been expecting this. I knew I shouldn't go, and yet when the bell tolled for the 7th time, I was already outside, feet dragging me toward the forest path. The closer I came, the more wrong the sound became. The bell no longer rang like metal. It rang like bone. Hollow, splintered, echoing with something wet inside. My stomach twisted, but my body pressed on, candle clutched tight in my trembling hand. When I reached the chapel, the door gaped open, shadows breathing in the threshold. The bell tower leaned above, its rope swaying in the night air, though no hands touched it. The tolling did not stop. It grew faster, each strike colliding with the next until it became less like a bell and more like a heartbeat. Inside, the choir was waiting. They rose with the tolling, their hymn weaving into the sound until bell and voice became one. The pews shook, dust pluming from the rafters, and I could feel the ground itself vibrating beneath me. I craned my neck upward. Through the shattered beams of the roof, I saw it. The bell itself. Its surface was cracked, its bronze eaten away by fire and rust, and yet with every toll, liquid sprayed from its fissures, thick, dark, dripping down the tower beams like blood. The hymn shifted, no longer a plea, no longer binding. It was triumph. The choir was celebrating the bell's song, their faceless voids lifted high, their mouths stretched impossibly wide as the liquid rained over them. One drop landed on my shoulder. It burned through cloth and skin alike, searing me as though the metal itself had melted onto me. I screamed, stumbling backward, but the hymn only rose higher, stronger, as if my pain had fed it. And then, with a final strike, the bell stopped. The silence that followed was a knife. The choir froze mid-sway, heads tilted toward the altar. Slowly, in perfect unison, they turned. Their void mouths did not move, but the words crawled through the silence, worming into my ears. One more toll and the door will open. I didn't ask which door. Some part of me already knew. Episode 8. The Choir of Shadows. I thought daylight would save me. For nights, the chapel's hymn had poisoned my sleep. Its bell had torn through the silence of 3:33. Its faceless choir had pressed against my sanity. But when the first gray of dawn crept over the village rooftops, I convinced myself the horrors belonged to the dark alone. I was wrong. The forest path felt different in the morning. The mist was thin, stretched like gauze between the trees, but every branch leaned toward the chapel as if drawn to its rot. The air tasted metallic, sharp, as though the soil itself bled beneath my boots. When the chapel came into view, my chest clenched. For the first time, the door stood wide in full daylight, yawning like a mouth that had swallowed too much. My instinct screamed to turn back. But curiosity is a sickness, and by then, I was already infected. Inside, the ruin was brighter than I had ever seen. Sunlight filtered through the broken roof, striking the dust and setting it aflame in golden beams. At first glance, the pews sat still, the altar cracked and waiting. It almost looked ordinary. Almost. Then the air began to move. It shimmered like heat rising from stone. Though the morning was cold, the shimmer thickened, bending the light, shaping itself into outlines. Rows of figures appeared, tall, short, wide, thin, seated where no one sat. The choir. But now I could see them. Their shadows rippled across the floor, stretching impossibly long, twitching in ways the figures did not. They swayed with the rhythm of an unheard hymn, their mouths yawning wide, though no sound filled the air. Yet the silence was worse. The silence was the hymn. I gripped the nearest pew for balance. My skin prickled as one shadow slid across my boots. It felt like stepping into ice water, a cold so deep it gnawed at the bone. Then, as though one mind controlled them all, the shadows turned. Dozens of faceless impressions fixed on me, their void mouths gaping wider. The hymn began again, not in my ears but in my blood. My pulse stuttered, matching their rhythm. My chest heaved to their breath. It was as if they had crawled inside me, each note tugging at my marrow. I staggered back, but the sunlight betrayed me. The beams that should have scattered them only sharpened their forms. They became clearer, denser, until the pews seemed full of robed figures, bowed as though in worship. And then, for the first time, one rose. Its shadow stretched until it blotted out the altar, towering and trembling with impossible weight. Its head tilted slowly, so slowly, until the faceless void aligned with mine. I couldn't breathe. The others followed, each shadow lifting, each void turning, until the entire choir stood, swaying in rhythm. Their hymn thundered inside my chest, drowning every thought. And in that storm of silence, a single word formed. Closer. Episode 9, the name that was sung. I thought I was strong enough not to obey. When the shadows rose from the pews, when their faceless voids tilted toward me, when that single word, closer, rippled through my bones, I swore I would resist, but my legs betrayed me. One step forward, then another, as if my body belonged to their hymn, not to me. The air grew heavier with each step. My candle guttered and died, though sunlight still leaked through the roof. Yet the chapel was dim, drained, as though the shadows swallowed every ray. Their hymn swelled, not out loud, not in the air, but inside my chest, filling me until I thought my ribs would split. And then I heard it. A word, a name, my name. It rang through the hymn like a bell tolling from deep water, stretched and twisted but unmistakable. They were singing me. I froze, bile rising in my throat. The faceless choir leaned forward as one, their mouths opening wider, dragging the sound out of me. My own lips trembled, forming syllables I hadn't chosen. The name tore from my throat in their rhythm, as if I had joined their song. "No!" I choked, clutching my mouth. But the sound didn't stop. The shadows hissed with pleasure, swaying faster, their hymn wrapping tighter around me. The altar cracked louder, splitting further down its length. A glow seeped from the break, pulsing with the rhythm of my name. With each pulse, the floor trembled, the pews groaned, and the shadows seemed to thicken into bodies. I tried to back away, but the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Dust rained from the rafters. I was trapped. "Why me?" I shouted, my voice ragged. "What do you want?" The hymn faltered, just for a breath. And in that pause, dozens of voices whispered over each other, tangled and wet, like water rushing through a grave. "We know you." The shadows writhed, twisting, bending toward me. My knees buckled under their gaze. My name tore from their mouths again and again, each syllable echoing like a command, stripping me bare. I dropped to the floor, hands pressed against my ears, but the sound came from within. It was in my veins, in my marrow. They weren't just calling me, they were claiming me. The glow beneath the altar flared, bright enough to blind. For a heartbeat, I saw the suggestion of something vast, something chained beneath stone, straining against the hymn that held it. The shadows screamed, their song piercing, desperate to drown the sight. And then just as suddenly, silence. The glow dimmed, the choir froze mid-sway. Only one voice lingered. It hummed softly, a lullaby twisted from my own name. And it came from my throat. Episode 10, The Altar That Bled. I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape the echo of my own name still humming inside me. My fingers clawed at the wood, but the chapel held it shut. Behind me, the faceless choir swayed in perfect rhythm, silent now, waiting for me to turn back. Then I heard it, drip, a soft, wet sound. Drip. I turned slowly. At first I thought the rain had found its way through the broken roof, but the sky outside was clear. Dawn barely lifting the horizon. No rain, no storm. The sound came from the altar. A crack split wider down the stone, glowing faintly as it had before. But now something seeped from it. Thick, dark, red. Blood. It ran sluggishly at first, tracing the grooves of the altar like veins. Then faster, streaming down its base, pooling at the steps. The smell hit me, iron, raw and metallic, like fresh wounds left too long in the sun. My stomach twisted, bile burning my throat. The choir moved as one, their faceless voids tilted toward the altar. Their hands, or what passed for hands, rose and trembled, hungry. The hymn began again, low and guttural, not a prayer, a feeding song. The pool of blood grew, spreading across the floor. It trickled between the pews, staining the trails of hardened wax I had seen before. Each drop seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, and with every beat, the glow beneath the altar flared brighter. I backed away, feet slipping on the wet stone. My reflection stared at me from the blood, eyes hollow, mouth moving to a rhythm I hadn't spoken. My voice rose unbidden, whispering the psalm I had read, the one that should not exist. The shadows rejoiced. Their swaying quickened, their hymn climbing higher. It was as if my words fed them, pulling more blood from the altar. "No," I gasped, clutching my throat. "Stop, stop!" The altar shuddered. A fissure split it clean down the middle. The blood gushed in torrents, rushing forward like a tide. It touched the nearest pew, and the wood screamed. Yes, screamed. The sound was splinter and shriek all at once, echoing like a dying animal. The pew split, warped, blackened, until it stood not as wood, but as something twisted. Its surface rippled like flesh, faces pressed against it from within, mouths open in silent cries. The hymn thundered, the blood surged, more pews screamed and shifted, warping into grotesque forms, the shadows of the choir fusing with them. The chapel no longer held them, it was becoming them. My knees buckled as the blood reached me, warm against my boots, creeping higher. The glow beneath the altar flared one last time, brighter than the sun, before dimming into nothing. And in that suffocating dark, a single voice cut through. Not the choir, not mine. Something deeper, something chained. Free me. Episode 11, The Confession That Wasn't Mine. The blood lapped at my boots, warm as breath. I staggered back, but the chapel had already shifted. The pews groaned with voices that were not wood. Shadows stretched across the walls like living veins, and the hymn trembled through the air as though the whole building were one enormous lung. I thought it could get no worse. Then I heard my own voice. At first I believed it was another trick of the hymn, but no, it was clearer, sharper, louder than before. My voice rose from the choir, woven into their endless song, and the words it spoke were not my prayers. They were my sins. Forgive me, Father, it began, soft and steady. For I have lied, I have coveted, I have cursed his name in secret. I clamped my hands over my ears, but nothing could block it. The confession spilled into the air, pouring from every faceless void, every gaping mouth of the unseen choir. They sang my secrets as if they had been waiting all along. Forgive me, Father, the voice groaned again, for I wished death on those who wronged me. For I spoke to the dark when God was silent. My throat closed, heart battering my ribs. These were things I had never spoken to anyone, things I thought I had buried so deep no soul could know. And yet the choir sang them with perfect pitch, dragging every shadow of me into the open. No, I whispered, tears burning my eyes. That isn't me, that isn't... But the hymn did not falter. The confession grew louder, more violent. My voice snarled from the walls, spitting hatred, betrayal, weakness. Sins I had hidden, sins I had never dared name. Some I barely remembered, others I had prayed would be forgotten. The shadows swayed, drunk on my shame, their hymn thick with satisfaction. I fell to my knees, the blood soaking into my clothes, clinging to me like a second skin. Stop, I begged. Please stop. The chapel obeyed. For a moment, silence reigned. I gasped, clutching my chest, my ears ringing with the absence of sound. Relief surged through me, until I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. A single figure stepped forward from the pews, taller than the rest, its shadow sharper, its void mouth wider. It bent close, and when it spoke, the voice that poured from it was still mine, only deeper, older, corrupted. Forgive me, Father, it whispered, for I am not finished. The hymn erupted again, not with the voices of many, but with the voice of one, mine. The chapel filled with it, every wall and stone trembling with my confession, my sins, my voice, my shame, echoing into eternity. And in that moment I understood I hadn't joined the choir. The choir had joined me. Episode 12, The Last Hymn of the Dead. I left the chapel that night with my own voice still echoing in my skull. Every step through the forest felt like walking inside a confession booth that would never close. My sins clung to me, sung by a choir that had no flesh, no mercy. I thought silence outside the chapel would free me, but it didn't. The hymn followed. Even in the open air, even under the pale moon, I could still hear it faintly, threaded beneath the wind, stitched into the rustle of leaves. My voice, my shame, my damnation, carried onward like smoke. By the time I reached the village, I was half mad. I stumbled to the old man's door, the one who had warned me. My fists pounded until my knuckles bled. At last he opened, his eyes sharp with dread. You went back, he rasped. They're singing me, I gasped. My voice, it's mine. But it's not. They know everything. His face tightened. He beckoned me inside, shut the door, and bolted it fast. The single candle on his table painted his skin in shadows as he spoke. The hymn was never meant for the living, he said. It belongs to the dead. I stared, chest heaving. What do you mean? The villagers who vanished, he continued, voice low. Every name sung in that chapel belongs to one of them. Their souls trapped, bound to that cursed psalm. That is why the song never ends. Each hymn is their final breath stretched into eternity. My mouth went dry. Then why me? I am not dead. His eyes glistened. Not yet. The words froze my blood. He leaned closer, whispering like a man confessing a crime. The last hymn is not praise. It is not prayer. It is a cage. The dead sing to keep the door beneath the altar closed. But each generation, the hymn chooses one living voice to join them, one anchor to hold the song in place. Once it claims you, there is no turning back. The candle guttered as if the shadows themselves leaned in to listen. My chest tightened. I could feel it, the hymn coiled in my lungs, waiting to pour out at their command. "I can't," I whispered. "I won't sing for them." The old man's face hardened. "Then something else will sing through you." Outside, the bell tolled once, just once. My heart stopped. It wasn't 3:33, it was dawn. The toll was not meant for the night. It was meant for me. The old man gripped my arm with desperate force. "Do you understand? The dead cannot keep the door shut forever. When their hymn breaks, when the silence comes, whatever they bound beneath the altar will rise." His hand trembled, his voice breaking. "And your voice is the key." Episode 13, The Door Beneath the Choir. The old man's words haunted me long after I left his house. Your voice is the key. That night I didn't sleep. I paced my room like a prisoner, my own throat vibrating with whispers I couldn't stop. Fragments of the hymn spilled out of me without permission, soft hums at first, then sharper notes that didn't belong to any language I knew. Each sound left me weaker, emptier, as though something else was using me up. By dawn I made my choice. If the hymn had chosen me, then I needed to know what it was holding back. I had to see the door. The forest seemed to open for me this time. No tangled branches, no biting wind, just a path that led straight and sure to the chapel. The building waited like a predator, its blackened stones slick with morning dew, its door gaping wide. Inside, the choir was already swaying, their shadows bent and twisted, their mouths open in soundless song. The hymn wasn't loud, it was patient, steady, humming like the tide. They were guarding something. I moved toward the altar, each step heavier than the last. The cracks along its surface still bled faintly, dark trails running like veins. I pressed my hand to the cold stone, and it shuddered beneath my touch. Then I saw it, a seam in the floor just below the altar, a narrow outline almost invisible beneath layers of hardened wax and blood. A door. The hymn swelled instantly, crashing against my skull like a wave. The shadows lurched from the pews, their faceless voids stretched wider, their swaying violent now. They didn't want me near it. I dropped to my knees, scraping the wax away with trembling hands. The stone beneath was marked with symbols I had never seen before, circles, crosses, spirals carved deep, blackened by fire. My fingers traced them and felt heat, as though the stone still burned from centuries past. "Show me," I whispered. The choir shrieked in unison, their hymn twisting into something jagged and frantic. The pews rattled, the windows cracked, the very walls groaned with strain. Yet beneath their fury, I heard something else, a voice. It came from below, muffled but immense, rising through the cracks. Not a hymn, not a plea, a roar, low, guttural, filled with hunger. The door pulsed under my palms, the cymbals glowing faintly as the voice pressed harder. The choir bent forward as one, their faceless voids gaping in desperation, their sound reaching a fever pitch. They weren't praising, they weren't worshiping. They were begging me not to open it. I staggered back, my breath tearing in and out. My own voice betrayed me, humming in rhythm with theirs, but the words that came out were not theirs. "Set me free." The sound didn't come from the shadows, it came from my mouth. And in that moment, I understood. The hymn wasn't only binding what was beneath the altar, it was binding me to it. Episode 14, The Song That Demanded Silence. The door beneath the altar pulsed like a living heart, each beat vibrating through my palms, through the stone, through my very chest. The choir screamed above me, shadows writhing, their hymn frantic, desperate, as if the sound itself were the only thing keeping the earth from splitting open. And in the chaos I remembered the old man's warning. The chapel only sings when no one prays. What would happen then, if I did? My lips trembled. Every instinct screamed not to. That prayer was the one sound the chapel did not allow. But the thought gnawed at me. What if prayer wasn't salvation, but destruction? Still I knelt. The shadows convulsed violently, their faceless voids twisting as if in agony. The hymn wavered, staggering like a body struck through the heart. My throat burned as their song tried to force itself back into me, but I pushed the words out anyway. "Our Father." The sound shattered the air. The hymn stopped. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute, deeper than any quiet I had ever known. Even the forest beyond the chapel froze. No wind, no birds, no breath. It was as though the world itself held still to listen. The shadows collapsed into stillness, frozen mid-sway. The pews stopped groaning, the walls ceased trembling. The entire chapel, once alive with sound, was nothing but stone and ruin again. At first I felt relief, then dread seeped in. Because silence in that chapel was not peace, it was absence. And absence meant the hymn was no longer holding anything back. From beneath the altar came a sound so soft I almost missed it. A breath, long, slow, drawn from lungs that should not exist. The crack widened, dust crumbling at my knees. The air that spilled out was cold, fetid, and sweet, like the stench of flowers rotting in a grave. The choir didn't move. They couldn't. Without the hymn, they had no voice, no power. They were only shadows now, corpses without their song. But something else moved. The altar split fully, stone shrieking as it gave way. From the darkness below rose a shape I couldn't comprehend, vast, coiled, trembling with restrained hunger, not flesh, not spirit, something between. My candle guttered and died, but I didn't need light. Its presence filled the chapel like a second sky, crushing, suffocating. A voice curled out of the dark, deeper than any bell, older than any scripture. At last, silence. The ground shuddered beneath me. The pews splintered, the roof groaned, dust raining down in choking clouds. My knees buckled, but I could not move, could not breathe, could not even scream. Because in that silence I realized the truth. Prayer had not saved me. It had unbound the song, and now the thing beneath the altar was free to speak. Episode 15, The Chapel That Sang Forever. The silence did not last. At first it was only the breath, heavy and ancient, rising from the broken altar. Then came the trembling, stones rattling, beams groaning, pews shivering like leaves caught in a storm. The faceless choir remained frozen, powerless without their hymn. But the thing beneath the chapel, it was no longer bound. It rose. The air thickened as the shadows pulled away from the pews, sucked back into the darkness yawning wide at the altar's heart. I felt it draw them in, stripping them of form until nothing remained but their emptiness. And in that emptiness, a new sound was born, a voice, not many, but one, a single note stretched thin, pure and sharp enough to cut through marrow. It wasn't sung by the choir. It wasn't sung by me. It was sung by it. The altar collapsed entirely, the stone splitting open like a cracked ribcage. From the gap surged a flood of black air, thick with the stench of grave earth and fire. It filled my lungs before I could turn away, and when I coughed, the sound that escaped wasn't mine. It was the hymn. My voice soared higher, fuller, until it matched the notes spilling from the altar. The chapel shook as the two sounds intertwined, merging into a single, terrible harmony. The pews splintered, the roof tore wide, and the bell above began to toll without hands, without rope. I tried to stop, to silence my throat, but it was no use. The song had claimed me. My lips moved in rhythms not my own. My lungs forced air I did not control. I was part of it now, and then I understood the truth. The choir had never been worshippers. They were prisoners. Every soul that vanished, every villager whispered about in hushed tones. They had not been taken by the hymn. They had become it. Each voice added to its weight, each confession folded into its endless chant. Now it was my turn. The black air writhed, shaping itself into something vast and monstrous, but I couldn't look away. Its presence filled the chapel, the forest, the very sky, and through me it sang. My name was gone now, dissolved into the hymn. My sins, my prayers, my voice, everything I was, woven into its eternal song. Outside, the village stirred. Lights flared in windows. Faces turned toward the forest. They heard it now, all of them. The hymn rolled over the fields, over the rooftops, over the trembling earth. Louder than bells, louder than storms. A sound that could never be silenced again. And as the shadows of the choir vanished into the thing they had once tried to bind, I realized there was no end. The hymn did not belong to the chapel. The chapel belonged to the hymn, and the hymn belonged to me. So I sing still even now. The chapel sings with me, and it will sing forever.
Epilogue, the silence you hear. They say the chapel still stands. The villagers avoid the path now. Though sometimes, at night, when the wind dies, you can see their curtains twitch. They hear it too. The hymn. Low. Steady. Endless. Some call it a curse. Others call it a warning. But all agree, the song never stops. I have forgotten the sound of my own voice. It's been swallowed. Folded into the choir that stretches far beyond stone walls and ruined pews. I am not alone here. The others are with me, men, women, children, bound together in a hymn that keeps nothing holy, nothing safe. And yet, in the rarest moments, I remember a flicker of myself, buried deep beneath the notes, a thought, a whisper, a plea. I was once alive. I was once free. The thing beneath the altar is free now too. It does not need chains. It does not need walls. It has us. So the hymn continues, circling the earth like a shadow. If you listen closely, if you wake at 3:33 with your heart pounding and your ears straining against the dark, you may hear it. A faint hum. A thread of voices stitched into the silence of your room. If you do, don't speak. Don't pray. Because the chapel only sings when no one prays. And if your lips dare to move, if you let a prayer slip into the air, even in a whisper, then the silence will fall. And silence is when it notices you. The bell tolls once. Even now. Not from the forest. From inside me. A reminder. A promise. A warning. Listen carefully tonight. Do you hear it? That's not your heartbeat. That's us. And we are singing for you.